Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new course from Design Plus Code. My name is Sai, and I welcome you to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. If you've been following some Design Plus Code news, you know that we're on the verge of releasing a new app. And this app was built in SwiftUI and has many amazing animations and backend features behind it. The goal of this course is to teach you how you can create just as amazing animations and backend features so that you can put them inside of your SwiftUI app. Let me show you some of the screens we'll be building. Over here, you can see the sign up screen. And we can also see some of the neat features it has. For example, when a text field is activated, we want to use haptic feedback, and we also want to let the icons scale and bounce. Furthermore, when an icon is active, we want it to glow. Of course, with the sign up page, we need a sign in page, and you can see that the sign in page resembles the sign up page, but you'll see that we also have a button for sign in with Apple. That means in this course, I will show you how you can add sign in with Apple to your SwiftUI application. We'll be using Firebase authentication to handle the login and sign up of user accounts inside of this application. Once a user has signed in, they'll be directed over to their very own profile screen, where they can see their name, their bio, some of the personal social medias they have, and how many certificates they have, as well as their user profile. When they click on the Settings button, they'll go over to the Settings page, where they can edit their user profile. Now, you might be wondering, where are we going to store all of this data? Since we're using Firebase authentication, you might think we'll be using Firebase Firestore or real-time database. But no, that's not the case. In this course, I'm very pleased to announce that I will be teaching you how you can use core data combined with CloudKit synchronization to store data of your application such that it can sync to all of your devices that are on the same Apple ID. If I switch over to this web view over here, we can see that we have the normal Firebase authentication page that normally displays all the user accounts we have. However, in this page, I have the CloudKit dashboard, and this is where we can manage all of the data and data schema that we'll be using inside of our application. If you're new to this page, don't worry. I'll walk you through how you can use CloudKit and core data to save some user data and synchronize it to Apple's very own database. If I head back to the Figma file and minimize it, I'd like to show you how the app currently runs on the simulators, and we can see what you'll be building in this course. To start off, I'll sign up for the application. So I'll enter my email, and then I'll enter a password. And notice how every time I'm clicking on the text field, we can see the icons are glowing. And because this is a simulator, we obviously can't feel the haptics. But don't worry, if you run it on a real device, those haptics will be there. After I enter the password, I'll click on Create Account. And instantly, the Firebase authentication modules create a new account for us. If I switch over back to Firebase authentication and reload the page, you can see that we have our account created over here. And that's all it is for Firebase. That's great because Firebase packages tend to take up a lot of storage inside of an application's bundle. So now that we're relying on CloudKit instead of Firebase Firestore, you can expect your app size to dramatically decrease. Next, I'll click on the Settings button over here, and let's add some changes over here. So I'll first enter my name, I'll enter my Twitter handle, add a website, and then maybe I'll add a bio. Instructor at Design Plus Code. Of course, I'll choose a photo, and I'll just choose the simple photo of a leaf. Then I'll click Save Settings. Once the settings have been saved, I'll click Cancel, and then I'll dismiss the screen. And we can see that the changes are over here. Furthermore, you'll notice that we also have a button to purchase a Lifetime Pro plan. While the simulator does not allow in-app purchases to be purchased, when we run an app on the real device, you'll be able to simulate a mock purchase of this application. So of course, this means that I will be covering how you can do in-app purchases inside of a SwiftUI application. we'll be using a very neat tool called Revenue Cat to make sure that our in-app purchases happen seamlessly. So if you're keeping track, there's a lot of new stuff to learn in this course. Now the last demo I want to give you is how all of these changes can synchronize over to another device that is logged into the same Apple ID. The way CloudKit works is that once we save some data to CloudKit, every few minutes, the iCloud will sync over all the data to the database. If we want, we can manually trigger this sync. So I'll go to Features, and then I'll click Toggle iCloud Sync. And then this will cause all of the data to sync with the CloudKit servers. Now, if I open up the app on another device, and then I go and click on the Sign In button, and notice the really cool transition we had over there. Next, I'll sign in to the account I had created earlier. And then I'll enter the password. And now, when I sign in, we can see that all of the data has synchronized over to this page. And that is just the basics of Core Data and CloudKit. So to recap, in this course we'll be learning a lot. I'll teach you how you can create amazing animations and you build very beautiful UIs, like this glowing button and all the glowing buttons you have seen. I'll teach you how you can combine Firebase authentication to manage user accounts, use sign-in with Apple to provide users with a very secure way of logging in, use in-app purchases inside of a SwiftUI application to purchase non-renewable purchases, and finally, and of course the biggest one, I'll teach you how you can do data management with Core Data and combine it over all of your devices with CloudKit. So I can't wait to see you all in the following sections. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye! Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll get started with building our application. Taking a look at the Figma design file, we can see that the first screen we have is the sign up screen. So that's what we'll build in this section. Heading back over to Xcode, I'll first create a new Xcode project. I'll make sure that the template we choose is App inside of the iOS tab. I'll click Next, and then I'll give my project a name. Here, I'll just name it SwiftUI Advanced. And I'll make sure that my interface is set to SwiftUI, my lifecycle is SwiftUI App, and furthermore, I'll make sure that Use Core Data and Host in CloudKit are selected. This will generate some code for us to make it easier for us to manage the data management across all of our devices. I'll click on Next, and then I'll save it. With the new project that is created, the first thing I'll do is make sure to import all of the required assets. Below you'll find the resources folder and a link to download them. So I'll first import all of the resources that we need. This is mostly assets and some code. First, let's import the assets. This contains the images and the colors we need. So I'll select these three folders and drop them into the assets.xc assets folder. And here you can find all the images we're going to use, the colors that I'll be referring to in my code, and some test images we have that we'll use within our app. Next, I'll need to import some of the code. So what I'll do is I'll drag this code folder over here and place it inside the SwiftUI Advanced folder. I'll select Copy Items if needed, create groups, and select Finish. Then I'll just rename this file. Instead of naming the folder to code, I'll just name it Helpers and press Enter. Alright, now I can go over to the content view. And first, let's remove some of this code. So first, I'll remove the core data import statement, and then I'll remove all these state and variable declarations. I'll empty the body structure, and then I'll remove all of these functions that we currently don't need as of right now. Inside of the body, I'll put our favorite text view that'll just say Hello World for now. Alright, and then I'll click Resume, and pretty soon we should see that our project is building, and then Content View will load. Let me change the simulator to something a little more modern, such as the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and then let's get started with building this sign up card that we have in our design over here. So first, I'll embed this text widget inside of a Z-stack. And then I'll, once again, inside of the Z-stack, embed the text widget inside of a V-stack. So first, before the V-stack, I'd like to add the background image. So I'll type image, give the name of the image, which is going to be background -3, and I'll add some of the properties. I'll add the resizable, then I'll set the aspect ratio to dot fill, and then I'll set it to dot edges, ignoring safe area dot all. And that is our background. Next, we have the VStack. And inside of this VStack, I'm going to embed this VStack inside of another VStack. And you'll see why pretty soon. In the innermost vertical stack, I'll add some of the properties. First, I'll set the alignment to dot leading. I'll set the spacing to 16. And we have the content as is. I'll remove this and add an ending parentheses. I'll change the text value from hello world to sign up. And then I'll customize this text view. First, I'll set the font to font.large-title.bold. Then I'll set the foreground color to .white. And then I'll add another text widget. This text widget will contain the string access to 120 plus hours of courses, tutorials, and live streams. Of course, I'll need to customize this as well. So I'll give it a font style of sub-headline and set the foreground color to .white, color.white with an opacity of 0.7. Before we go on adding the rest of the stuff inside of our card view, let's first make sure that this looks like a card. I'll first add dot padding and give it a padding value of 20 pixels. Next, in the outermost vertical stack, I'll first set the background. This will be a dot background, and then the view I'll be using is a rounded rectangle where the corner radius is of 30 pixels. I'll add a stroke to this card, and this is going to be a stroke of color.white.opacity of 0.2. Next, I'll need to add the background of this rounded rectangle. This is going to have the background of color, and the name of this color is going to be secondary background with an opacity of 0.5. I'll add another background, and this time we'll be using the visual effect blur view. So I'll type visual effect blur, add a set of parentheses, and the blur style is going to be dot system thin material dark. Finally, I'll need to add a shadow. So I'll type dot shadow and then set the following properties. The color will be color with the name of shadow color, where the opacity is 0.5. The radius is 60 pixels, the X value is 0, and the Y value is 30 pixels. And finally, at the end of the background, I'll add the corner radius, which is going to be 30 pixels, and the padding, which will be dot horizontal. If you're wondering where we got the visual effect blur view over here, that came from one of the helper files. This file was given by Apple, and it's used to provide the UI visual blur when the app is run. So if I switch back over to content view, we can see that it looks pretty dark. However, if I run the app, we can see that we now have a very thin blur view over here. Now let's add the text fields. Specifically, we'll add the email and the password text field. So I'll open up the library, and then I'll search for text field. I'll take it and I'll drag and drop it right underneath the text subtitle text we have over here. I'll give it a title of email, and we need to provide a value. So right before the variable body, we'll need to create a new state variable. So I'll type add state private var email of type string is equal to empty quotes. And then the value over here will be $email. Next, what I'll do is I'll make sure that I put this text field inside of an H stack. Because we want our text field to have an icon, right before this H stack, I'll type image, system name, and we'll give an SF symbol of envelope.open.fill. I'll also make sure to click resume, and the reason the preview stopped is because we had to create a new state variable. I'll make sure that the foreground color of the image is .white. And I'll also make sure that the spacing of the H stack is of 12 pixels. Now underneath the text field, I'll need to add some modifiers. The first modifier is going to be the color scheme. Since we have a dark card, I'll make sure to set the color scheme to .dark. Next, I'll set the foreground color, and this is going to be color.white.opacity of 0.7, and then I'm going to add some of the text modifiers. I'll set auto capitalization to .none, and then I'll set the text content type to .email address. And there we can start to see the beginnings of our text field. Now underneath this, we'll need to style the H stack itself. So what I'll do is I'll first give it a frame where the height will be 52 pixels. Then I'll add an overlay. This overlay is going to have a rounded rectangle view. The rounded rectangle view will have a corner radius of 16 pixels. Furthermore, we're going to give it a stroke, and the stroke is going to be color.white, where the line width is 1 pixels. And finally, we'll need to set the blend mode to .overlay, so that it contrasts well against our background. Finally, we'll need to add the background for our H stack. This background is simply going to be a color. It'll be the secondary background color, and then we're going to give it a corner radius of 16 pixels so it matches against the previous corner radius, and an opacity of 0.8. And there we go. If we run our code now, we can start to see the beginnings of our text field. Now I'll need to add the password text field. So at the top, I'll first add a new variable called password, which will also be of type string and be empty for now. I'll resume the preview. Then I'll copy this entire HStack code and I'll paste it right underneath here. So now we'll have two text fields, but we'll need to change some of the properties. First, we'll change the SF symbol to be key.fill. Next, we'll change the text field type to a secure field. We'll give it the name of password, and the text is going to be $password. Furthermore, the text content type will be .password. And everything else is going to stay the same. Now, if I run the preview, we can see that our text field is there. And don't worry about the padding over here if that's bugging you. In the next section of the course, we'll complete the rest of the card and we'll start to stylize some of the icons and buttons we'll be using throughout the app. So I'll see you all there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye! Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll build the rest of our sign-up card. Taking a look at the Figma file, we can see that we have to add the buttons and some of the disclaimer text. The two buttons that I will be teaching you how to stylize in this section is the simple sign-in button and this create account button. So let's get started. First, I'm going to continue adding to my card. So right underneath the H stack, which contained our password text field, I'm going to add a button view. So I'll type button, and then have autocomplete do its work. So we'll pass the parameters of action and label. For now, we'll just say the action is going to be sign up, and then the label is going to be a text where the string is also sign up, and we'll see how to style this later. Now I want to build the rest of the bottom of the card. This includes this text view over here, and then this button view over here. So what I'll do is first, I'll type text, and over here the string value is going to be, by clicking on sign up, you agree to our terms of service and privacy policy. Then the font is going to be a style of .footnote, and the foreground color is going to be color.white with a 70% opacity or 0.7. Next, I need to add the divider. And over here, the divider is just going to be a rectangle view. The rectangle view is going to have a frame where the height is 1, and then the foreground color is going to be color.white with an opacity of 0.1 or 10%. And we can start to see that our design is slowly taking shape. The reason I didn't use a view like divider was simply because the rectangle view gave us more customization. Next, what I want to do is add this already have an account sign in. Because this button would be really small if I tapped on it, I want to make sure that this whole horizontal stack is tappable, and when I tap on it, that the card will flip around and will show the sign in screen. So I'll head on back here, and first what I'll do is create a vertical stack. So I'll type vstack, set the alignment to dot leading, the spacing to 16, and the content is going to be a button. And much like before, we'll pass the action and the label. The action for now is going to say print switch to sign in. And the label over here is, just like I talked about, a horizontal stack. Here the spacing is going to be 4 pixels, and we're going to have the text and the button views. The first text view is going to be already have an account ? We'll style it such that this text view also has a view modifier of .font.footnote and a foreground color of color.white with an opacity of 0.7. And last but not least, we need to add a gradient text. But first, I'll add the text view, and then what I'll do is make sure that this has a string called sign in. And this is just going to have a font of .footnote, and I'll also bold it so users know that this is the important part over here. Now comes the fun part of styling our buttons. First, we'll style in the sign in button. If you take a look at it, we can see that it has a light gradient from the top left to the bottom right, from a darker shade of pink purple all the way to this lighter shade of pink. So we're going to implement that in our SwiftUI code. Now you might think, if you have some experience with SwiftUI, that we'll use a linear gradient view and then use some masking and then an overlay to make sure that our text is a gradient. And that's a valid approach, but since we'll be using gradient text throughout the app, what we need to do is make sure that we have a reusable view modifier. So I'll show you how we can create our own view modifier right now. So scrolling to the bottom of the file, what I'll do is I'll type extension view. Inside of the curly braces, I'll create a new function. So I'll say public, which makes the function available to all different files, public function gradient foreground, and then add a set of parentheses, and then a set of curly braces. However, inside the parentheses, I'll need to add a parameter called colors, which is going to be an array of color. Then we want it to return a view, so I'll have it return some view. And what we're going to do inside over here is we're going to say self.overlay, and the overlay content is going to be, as you guessed, a linear gradient view, where the gradient is going to be a gradient, where the colors are the colors parameter that we gave. The start point will be .top leading, and the end point will be .bottom trailing. And once we have this overlay view modifier, the last view modifier we'll need is the mask view modifier, which we'll just set to self. And that's how we'll be able to, there's a typo, that's how we'll be able to create our own view modifier. And using this gradient foreground view modifier, we can use it back inside of our code right now. So after the sign in text we have over here, I'll type dot gradient foreground, and the color over here is going to be color, where the first color is pink hyphen gradient hyphen 1, and the second color is going to be a color where the name is pink hyphen gradient hyphen 2. And we should have imported this earlier in the previous section of the course. I'll click on resume now, and we should see that all of a sudden our sign in button has a gradient applied to it. Isn't that great? Now, we'll probably want to reuse this view, so what I'm going to do is Command and select on this text view over here, and then select Extract Subview. The name of this extracted view will be Gradient Text. And we should see that it's been created down below over here. Furthermore, not every gradient text will use the view modifiers of footnote style and a bold font, so I'll cut those out and paste them immediately after here. Furthermore, not every gradient text is going to have the sign in as its string, so what we'll need to do is create a new variable right before the body variable called var text of type string is equal to text here. And instead of sign in, we'll replace this with text. Now going back up to where we declared gradient text, we're going to pass the text parameter, and as you guessed it, it's going to be sign in. Now if you take a look, we have an error over here, and this is because not all views support the .bold view modifier. So I'll take this out and instead add it to over here. So it'll say font.footnote.bold. And now if I resume, everything is the same, but our code is a little bit more cleaner. Next, we'll build the sign up button. I'll scroll up to where we had our sign up button over here. And first, I'll remove the text label. The first view that we will need is a geometry reader. So I'll add that in, geometry in, and next what I'll do is add a z-stack modifier, because we'll need to overlay some of the content. Taking a look at our design, we'll need to first add the blur, then the button, and then the text on top of it. So inside of this z-stack, first I'll add an angular gradient. And for now, what I'll do is I'll pass the following parameters. Gradient, where I'll leave it to color.red and color.blue for now. The center will remain .center, and we'll set the degrees to 0. Next, what I'll need to do is add a blend mode. The blend mode is going to be .overlay. The blur is going to have a radius of 8. And then the mask is going to be the rounded rectangle view from our design. So I'll type rounded rectangle, and I'll give it a corner radius of 16 pixels. Next, what we're going to do is add the frame. The frame is going to have a height of 50 pixels, and then it's going to have a max width, where the maximum width is going to be geometry.size.width minus 16. Finally, we'll give it a blur, where the radius is 8 pixels. Now, after this angular gradient, what we need to add is the gradient text view that we created earlier. So I'll add gradient text, and here the text is going to be sign up. Finally, we'll customize it so that the font is .headline, and I'll move it up a bit. It's going to have a frame, where the frame is going to have a width of geometry.size.width minus 16. And then the frame is also going to have a height of 50, just like earlier. And finally, it's going to have a background. The background is going to be a color view, where the color is going to be the tertiary background that we have inside of our assets folder. We'll set the opacity of this color to 0.9. Now, after we have the background view modifier, we'll need to add an overlay view modifier. This view modifier is going to be just like the one from above, where we have a rounded rectangle with the corner radius of 16 pixels. It's going to have a stroke of color.white and a line width of 1 pixels. And then we're going to have a blend mode, where the blend mode is .normal. And finally, the opacity is 0.7. Finally, we'll give the main view a corner radius of 16 pixels. Now taking a look at our preview, we can see we have this really big gap. Lucky for us, we can eliminate this by simply setting the frame so that the height is 50 pixels. And there we go. We can see that if we start running our app, we can start to see the blur take shape, and we have the view over here. Just like earlier, I'll command and click on the button view and select Extract Subview. And this name is going to be Gradient Button. Inside of the gradient button structure that's been created over here, let's fix the colors that we have over here. To do this, we'll need to import the colors that were used in our Figma file. But lucky for you, I've decided to just code it over here so you can see what it is. So we'll create a new variable called gradient1, which is going to be an array of colors, and we'll set it equal to the following array. And lastly, we'll need to replace this array color over here with the variable we just created, gradient1. Now I'll click resume, and once everything has built, you can see that the gradient in the background matches the gradient we have over here. Isn't that great? Next section of the course, I'll tell you how we can build these customizable icons over here, and furthermore, how when we tap on one of the text fields, we'll create a delightful animation for the following icons. So I'll see you all then. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon. Goodbye. Hi everybody, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll see how we can stylize the following text field icons and how we can perform a short animation every time the text field is activated. Before we do that though, let's refactor our code a little bit. Taking a look at this file, we can see that it's pretty long and it has multiple views inside of it. This isn't the best practice, so let's create a new file for us to put our views inside. I'll right-click on the sidebar and select New Group. The name of this group is going to be Views, and inside of this folder, I'm going to create a new file. The first file is going to be a Swift file, and we'll just name this Gradient Text. At the top, I'll make sure to import SwiftUI, and then heading back over to Content View, I'll make sure to select the gradient text structure and the extension view. I'll go back over here and paste it below. And just for good practices, I'll make sure to put the extension at the end of the file. Alright, now heading back over to Content View, what I'll need to do is do the same just for the gradient button as well. So I'll take this entire structure and I'll cut it out of here. Then I'll create a new file inside of gradient text inside of the views folder and call it gradient button. And over here at the top, I'll make sure to import SwiftUI and then paste it as well. Next, what we'll do is create a new view, and this is going to have a file name of text field icon. So I'll select new file and then select SwiftUI view. Then I'll set this name to text field icon and press create. So let's get the preview up and running. And once we have the preview up and running, you should see our favorite Hello World text view. Now first, we'll make sure to embed this text view inside of a Z-stack. We'll remove the text view, and then we'll add a visual effect blur, where the style is going to be .dark. Now before we proceed, let's take a look at what we have detailed regarding our icons. We want it to glow only when it's active, and when it's active, we want it to scale and bounce as well as use a haptic feedback when we press on it. So what this means, as we can see in the design, is that only when the text field is active should the icon glow. Otherwise, it should not. Therefore, we need a way to know if the text field that this icon belongs to is currently being edited. So right before var body, what I'll do is add an add binding parameter, where I'll give it a variable name of currently editing. And this is just going to be a Boolean variable. Now inside of the preview, what I'm going to do is insert the currently editing parameter, and I'll set it to a dot constant of false for now. Now inside the visual effect blur, what I'm going to do is first add the color view. The color is going to be a tertiary background color, and then it's going to have a corner radius of 12 pixels. It's going to have an opacity of 0.8, and lastly, it's going to have a blur radius of 3 pixels. Now, after the Z-stack, what I'm going to do is add the corner radius. The corner radius is going to be 12 pixels, and furthermore, we're going to add an overlay modifier. This overlay modifier is where we're going to add our icon. So what I'll do is I'll type Z-stack, and then inside a set of curly braces, I'll type rounded rectangle, and the corner radius is going to have a style of 12 pixels. It's going to have a stroke, where the stroke is color.white with a line width of 1 pixel, and the blend mode is going to be .overlay. And this is very familiar to how we created our sign up button earlier. Next, what I'll do is provide the image view with a name of system name, and then the string is going to be key for now. What I'll do is pass the gradient foreground view modifier that we created in the previous section of the course. The colors array is going to be the same colors that we normally use. So the first one is going to be pink hyphen gradient hyphen 1, and the second one is going to be pink hyphen gradient hyphen 2. Furthermore, we need to style this image. So I'll provide another view modifier called .font, where the font is going to be a system of size 17, a weight of .medium, and the design is going to be normal, so we can just remove it. Our icon is way too big, so to resize it, we're going to provide the frame and padding view modifiers for our Z-stack. So underneath .overlay, make sure to type .frame, where the width is going to be 36 pixels, the height is 36, and the alignment is .center. Then we're going to add the padding view modifier. The padding is going to only have a .vertical and .leading padding, and it's going to have a size of 8. Text field icon looks good, but only if the text field is not being edited. What if I set the constant to true? Well, it's going to look the same, but what we want is to make sure that it has a glow effect. So we'll need to make sure that there is an angular gradient. So what I'll do is first I'll click on the color view and make sure to embed in Z-stack. Now before the color view, I'm going to add an if statement. If currently editing, so if the currently editing variable is set to true, we're going to show an angular gradient. This angular gradient is going to have the parameters gradient, center, and angle. Now the center is going to be .center, so we can leave that as is, and then the angle is going to be .degrees, and we'll set it to 0 for now. Now the gradient is going to be a list of colors, much like how we made our gradient for the continue button earlier. So what I'll do is I'll remove all the colors inside of this array, and then I'll go to gradient button. Over here, I'll make sure to select this entire variable and go back to text field icon. Then, right before the body variable, I'll paste it over there. And then we can remove the colors array empty array over here and simply replace it with gradient 1. And now, if I click resume preview, we should see that we have the glowing effect. However, we can see that it's not perfect, so we'll need to add some view modifiers. The first one we'll add is a blur view modifier, and it's going to have a radius of 10 pixels. Now, if you notice, we have manually set the image to key. However, since we'll be using the text field icon again and again, let's make sure that we have a parameter that lets anyone input any SF symbol they want. So right before the currently editing variable, what I'm going to do is type var icon name is of type string. Then in the preview down below, I'll make sure to add the missing argument. Over here, I'll give it key.fill as the icon name. And lastly, I'll make sure to change the system name, which is currently set to the string value of key, to icon name. And now, if I click on the resume preview, we should see that our icon has changed to key.fill. And with our text field icon complete, we can close this file and start to use it inside of our content view. I'll remove the image we have over here and then pass the text field icon view we just created. The icon name is going to be envelope.open.fill. And now we need to have a variable, or specifically a state variable, that tracks whether the email text field is currently being edited. So I'll scroll up to the top, and underneath the email and password state variables, I'll also add @state private var editing email text field of type bool is equal to false. I'll copy this and paste it right below, and this is going to be for the password text field. So I'll change the name of the variable to editing password text field. Now over here, for the currently editing argument, I can type $ editing email text field. And currently, because it is set to false, if I resume my preview, we can see that our icon is here and there is no glow because we have set editing email text field to false. However, let's change this up. So right underneath the text field, what I'll do is add a set of curly braces, and then I'll say is editing in, and every time the text field is being edited, I'll set editing email text field to is editing, and I'll set the editing password text field to false. And so now, if I click on play, and then I click on the text field, we can see that the glow has appeared. Let's make the same change to the password text field. So what I'll do is I'll remove the image view and replace it with the text field icon view. And here I'll set icon name to key.fill, and I'll set currently editing to editing password text field. Now over here, it's going to be a little different because we can't track is editing for a secure field in SwiftUI as of SwiftUI 2.0. Hopefully in SwiftUI 3.0, we can make this change. To make sure that we still get the glow we want, what we can do, however, is add an on-tap gesture to our current HStack. So I'll type .on tap gesture, and inside of this code, what I'm going to do is set editing password text field to true, and then editing email text field to false. And now, if I click on play, we can see that if I tap on the password text field, the glow appears, and if I select the email text field, the glow disappears from here and shows for the email text field. In the next section of the course, I'll tell you how you can take these animations even further by giving them a bounce animation every time they are activated. And furthermore, we'll see how we can use the UI feedback generator to perform haptic feedback. So, I'll see you all then. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon. Goodbye! Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to a new section of Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll continue taking a look at interactive animations. So far, we've been able to create this glowing effect for our buttons, and furthermore activating the glow if a particular text field has been activated. Now what we want to do is make sure that we provide haptic feedback upon every user interaction and add a bouncing effect to each of our icons. So we'll get started with that. At the top of the file, what we're going to do is we're going to import a new package called Audio Toolbox. And this framework is important for making sure that we get the haptics we want. Underneath the variables for editing email and password text fields, we're going to create a new private variable. So I'll type private let generator is equal to UI selection feedback generator. This generator is going to be used to generate haptics, and while we can't test that on the simulator, I do encourage you to go ahead and run the app on your device so that you can test out the generator to see how the haptics feel for you. Now we also need to build the bouncing animation for our icons. So what I'll do is create two more state variables. The first state variable is going to be for our email icon. So I'll create a new variable called email icon bounce, which is going to be of type Boolean, and it's going to be equal to false. Similarly, I'll create another state variable called password icon bounce of type Boolean, which is also equal to false. Now I can get started with creating some of the bounce animations that we require. To first create the bounce effect for our email icon, we'll need to change the scaling of this icon. So underneath the text field icon view for our email text field, I'll type dot scale effect, and inside of the parentheses, I'll type email icon bounce, meaning if the email icon bounce is set to true, we'll scale it by a factor of 1.2. Otherwise, which is denoted by the colon, we'll set it back to default with a value of 1.0. Now inside of this is editing field, what I'll do is first I'd like to give it the haptic. So I'll type generator.selectionChanged. And that's really all you need to make sure that a haptic is enabled every time the text field is activated. Now, over here, what I'll do is check if isEditing is set to true. So if the text field is being edited with an animation, and I'll customize the animation to be a spring animation, where the response is 0.3, the damping fraction is 0.4, and the blend duration is 0.5, what I'll do is set email icon bounce, and I'll toggle it, meaning I'll set it to the opposite value of what it is right now. So I'll run this right now to see what it looks like. So we can see that we have this here, and now if I click on the email, we can see that it glows and we have the scaling. However, we want it to bounce, meaning it should revert back to its default size. So what I'll do is make sure to add dispatch queue.main.async_after.now plus 0.25. And what this is doing is it's going to be a piece of asynchronous code that runs exactly 0.25 seconds after the with animation has been completed. So what we want it to do is we want with an animation of just like before, dot spring, a response of 0.3, a damping fraction of 0.4, and a blend duration of 0.5, we like it to toggle back. So email icon bounce dot toggle. And now if I try this out, if I click on the email text field, we can see that it gives it a nice bounce. Let's try it again. So I'll go to password, and then I'll go to email, and we can see that very nice bounce over there. Isn't that cool? Now, if you're wondering how I got the values for the spring animation, it really was just a lot of trial and error, just playing around with the numbers until I saw something that I liked. So I highly encourage you to play around with these numbers and play around with some of the values I showed throughout the course until you get the UX that you desire. Let's do the same for the icon inside of our password text field. So I'll scroll down to where we have the text field icon over here. I'll set the scale effect such that it will be set that if password icon bounce is true, we'll set it to 1.2. Otherwise, we'll set it to 1.0. Now, we don't have an isEditing property for the secure field view, so we'll have to rely on the on-tap gesture, which if you've been using by now, know it's not 100% perfect. However, hopefully SwiftUI 3 offers some sort of completion handler for the secure field. So inside of the on-tap gesture, I'll type generator.selectionChanged to give us the haptic feedback we want. Then I'll check if editing password text field is true, then what I'd like to do is with an animation, and just like earlier, a spring animation where the response is 0.3, the damping fraction of 0.4, and a blend duration of 0.5, what I'd like to do is toggle the password icon bounce. So password icon bounce dot toggle. And then after this, I'd like to type dispatch queue.main. and then some asynchronous code that will run exactly 0.25 seconds after the current code, so plus 0.25. Then we'd like to execute the reverse, so I can simply just copy this code and paste it over here. And now if I click on the password text field, we can see that we have the bounce here as well. Same with the email icon bounce. Wasn't that great? Now there's one last interactive animation that we can add to our screen. If we take a look at the current Figma file, we're instructed to animate the glowing outline clockwise when the button is there. So that's what we'll add over here. It's worth noting though that these kind of animations can be computationally expensive, and unless you're running one of the newer iPhones, if users are on an older iPhone, these kinds of animations can quickly heat up the device, causing a pretty terrible user experience. So that's why it's best to make sure that these animations don't last longer than 10 seconds. So heading over to the gradient button file, what we'll do at the top is create a new variable. So I'll type add state private var angle is equal to 0.0. And what this is going to be is a variable of type double. And we're going to change the value of this angle variable throughout our animation. So what I'll do is I'll replace the 0 degrees over here with the angle variable we have just created, and underneath the dot mask view modifier, I'll type dot on appear, and inside of the curly braces, I'll say with animation dot linear, and I'll give it a duration of 7 seconds, so it's still less than 10 seconds. What I'll do is increment the angle value by 350 degrees. And that's all you really need. So if I go back over to the content view over here, and if I stop the preview, zoom in a little, and then start running it again, you should be able to see how the outline changes the color as it slowly goes around. If you want a bigger view, you could also run the app on a simulator right now, and then you can more clearly see how the blue slowly goes over to this side, and we can see how all the colors are rotating. Now let's add the same animation to the text field icons we have. So I'll stop running this, and I'll open the text field icon file. At the top, I'll create a new private variable that is of type state, and we'll call this color angle, and we'll set it to a value of type double and set it equal to 0.0. Then I'll replace the degrees over here with the color angle variable, and last but not least, what I'll do is after the dot blur view modifier, I'll say dot on appear with animation dot linear, giving it a duration of 7 seconds. What I'll do is increment color angle, so self.colorAngle plus is equal to 350. And if we run the app in the simulator right now, we should be able to see the same animation happening on the icons whenever they are activated. And that brings us to the end of this section. In the next section of the course, we'll start to work with Firebase authentication to start letting users sign up into our account so that we can manage users. I'll see you all then. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon. Goodbye. Hello everyone. My name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll take a look at Firebase authentication and get started with creating our Firebase project and adding the required packages that we'll need. So if we go over to firebase.google.com, we can see a quick intro about Firebase if you're unsure of what it is. Firebase is a mobile platform solution that is offered by Google that makes it very easy for app developers to get their apps up and running with a very powerful backend. With Firebase, you get a bunch of products offered to you, such as Firebase Authentication, which lets you manage your users, Cloud Firestore, which acts as a database, Google Analytics and Crashlytics to help with the release and monitoring of your app, and of course Cloud Messaging, which manages push notifications, and more. While there is a lot to explore in Firebase, for now we'll only take a look at Firebase Authentication to manage our users. So I'll close this tab and go to the Firebase console, which is at console.firebase.google.com. I'll select Add Project and give my project a name. I'll call this Advanced SwiftUI. I'll click Continue, and I'll disable Google Analytics for this project since we don't need it right now. And then I'll select Create Project. And while this project is creating, what we can do is go back over to Xcode and download the Firebase Authentication Framework. To do this, I'll go to File inside the menu bar, select Swift Packages, and then select Add Package Dependency. Now the package repository URL is going to be github.com/firebase/firebase-ios-sdk. I'll select Next, and then we can see that it's verifying the repository. I'll select Next, and it will continue to resolve, and then once it has resolved the repository, it will show us a list of Swift packages we can add to our project. Meanwhile, if we head back over to Firebase console, we can see that our project is ready. So I'll click Continue, and we're taken over to our project's dashboard. To get started, we'll select iOS in order to link our project to the iOS app we have. First, I need to register my iOS bundle ID. You can find this bundle ID by going over to the project over here and then selecting Bundle Identifier in the pop-up that shows up. But because I know my bundle identifier, I'll enter it over here. I'll type io.designcode app.swiftui-advanced. And then for an app nickname, I'll just give it iOS. I'll click Register App, and so our iOS app's bundle identifier will get linked to the Firebase project. I'll download the information.plist file, which is going to contain some metadata about the Firebase project. The remaining steps are about how to install the Firebase SDK, but we've already done that, so there's no need to go over those steps. Now I'll head back over to Xcode, and over here we can see a list of all the packages and targets we want to add the packages to. We'll only select Firebase Authentication for now, because that's the only package we'll be taking a look at. Then I'll select Finish, and we now have access to the Firebase SDK and specifically the Firebase Authentication Framework. If I go over to SwiftUI Advanced App, the first thing I need to do is initialize the Firebase app. So what I'll do is I'll type import Firebase. Once I've added the import statement, I'll need to configure the Firebase app. So I'll type init, add a set of parentheses, and then add a set of curly braces. This is the initialize function, and any code inside of this method will run when the SwiftUI Advanced app is first initialized, or when we first launch our app. Inside of this method, I'll type firebase app.configure, and that's all we need. The last thing we need to do is to make sure we add our Google service-info.plist file to our project. So I'll take the file that we downloaded over here and drop it underneath the info.plist file. Make sure that copy items if needed, create groups, and SwiftUI Advanced are all selected. And now I can run my app on a simulator, and if everything works well, we should see the app build like normal. And while you won't see any visual changes, you'll know that the Firebase framework has been imported. At the bottom, we can see we have some messages from Google Utilities, which means that our app is successfully communicating with Firebase. So congratulations! Using Swift Package Manager, you are able to import the Firebase SDK, and in the next section of the course, we'll see how we can turn this sign up button into an actual functioning button and make sure that we register our users and have a place to manage them inside of our Firebase console. So I'll see you all then. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon. Goodbye! Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll start to use some of the APIs that is provided by the Firebase Authentication Framework to allow our users to sign up into our application. If we take a look at our Figma design file, we know that once a user signs up and selects the Create Account button, what they'll do is that the app will segue over to this profile screen over here. So in this section, we'll take a look at all the code that is run anytime a user clicks on the Create Account button. So let's get started with that. First, what we need to do is go over to the Firebase console, and we'll click on the Authentication tab over here. This is the tab where you can manage all of your users and configure all the sign-in providers that our app can provide through Firebase. I'll click on Get Started. Initially, Firebase first asks us for a sign-in provider. We'll make sure to enable the email and password sign-in provider. And we won't be using email link, so we can leave this toggle off. I'll click on Save, and we should see that email and password is now enabled. Again, we'll be using sign-in with Apple later on in the course. So I'll select the Apple row over here, and I'll make sure to enable this as a sign-in provider. Then I'll click on Save. We should see that sign-in with Apple is also enabled right now. Now if I go over to this Users tab over here, it will show me a list of all the users who have signed up for our application. However, there aren't any users yet, but we'll fix that really quick. Let's go back to the Xcode project, and let's get started with signing up a user. Since we'll be using the Firebase Authentication Framework, at the top, I'll need to import Firebase Auth. Then, I'll scroll on down to where we have the Sign Up button, and this should be the gradient button that we have over here. If we take a look at the gradient button view, we can see that as of right now, it's a static view with a simple button that says sign up. If I jump to the definition, we'll jump over to the gradient button.swift file, where we only have the parameters angle and gradient1 that are used inside. We can see that the action manually prints a message to the console, and we have no way of customizing the title of our button. Let's fix that right now. So underneath gradient1, I'll type var button title is of type string, and var button action is of type empty parentheses arrow void. And what this is an action handler. So over here, in place of button, we can remove the curly braces and replace this with button action. Furthermore, if we scroll on down, we can remove the sign up text and replace it with button title. And that's all it takes to customize our gradient button. So if I close this file and go back to content view, I'll need to add the parameters to our gradient button. So I'll remove the empty set of parentheses and add an open set of parentheses and import the parameters button title and button action. For button title, I'll make sure to follow the Figma design we have where it says create account. So that's exactly what I'll type over here. And then I'll press enter for the button action. And for now, I'll just type generator.selectionChanged. And now, if I resume the preview, we should see that the title of the button changes over to create account. And it does. So now we can get started with writing the function that signs up a user into our application. If you've used Firebase before, this is going to be very simple. At the bottom of the structure, what I'll do is create a new function called signup. So I'll type func signup, add an empty set of parentheses, and a set of curly braces. Inside of this method, I'll type auth.auth in lowercase with an empty set of parentheses, dot create user, and then it'll ask for the parameters of an email and a password. Of course, we already have the email and password we want to sign up with. We created those variables a few sections ago, so I'll pass the email and password variables we created above. So over here, I'll type email, and then for password, I'll pass password. Then for the completion handler, I'll make sure that we create two new variables called result and error. Inside of this completion handler, what I'll do is first make sure that error is nil. So what I do is I check to see if guard error is equal to nil. If it is not, and if there is an error, then what I'll do, forgot an else over here. If there is an error, then what I'll do right now is make sure to print error.localized description, and then I'll return it so we don't execute the rest of the method. However, if error is nil and the user has signed up successfully, then what I'll do is make sure to print that the user signed up. I'll go back over to the action for our gradient button, and underneath generator.selectionChanged, I'll call the signup function. Now, if I resume the preview, everything should build properly. And if I start running the preview, I can enter my email, and then I'll enter the password, which is just going to be password, and then I'll select create account. And nothing gets printed to the console right now. But what if I try running the same thing in the simulator, then we'll have the messages printed over to the console, and this can be useful for debugging APIs like the Firebase API. Inside of this simulator, what I can do is enter my email and do the same thing as I did in the preview. So I'll enter the email and the password, and I'll select create account. And then we'll see a message over here saying the email address is already in use by another account. This is actually an error message, and because we already created the account over here in our preview, we can't create another account with the same email. But we can verify whether or not this account has actually been created by going over to the Firebase console. And now if I reload the users, we can see that we have a new user registered over here. Isn't that cool? With just 5 to 6 lines of code, we were able to create a user and save it onto our Firebase project. Now going back over to Xcode, once a user signs up, we want a way such that we know that a user has currently signed in, so we can immediately segue over from the sign up screen over to the main profile screen. So what we'll do is go over to the gradient button view, which is over here, and what we'll do is add an onAppear view modifier. So I'll type .onAppear and then add a set of curly braces. Inside of this method, what I'll do is type auth.auth.add state did change listener. Press enter, and then I'll type auth and user. What this code is doing is that it's communicating with Firebase authentication, and anytime that a user changes, whether a user has been signed in or detected or is signed out, all the code inside of this method will be executed. Now, what that means is that when a user signs in, we would like our app to segue over to the profile view. So I'll create a new SwiftUI view. I'll control and click on Content View, select New File, and from the pop-up that shows up, select SwiftUI View. I'll simply call this Profile View. And in the new SwiftUI view that's created, I'll make sure to replace the string of Hello World with simply Profile View. We'll customize our Profile View later on in the course. Heading back over to Content View, I now need to perform the segue between Signup View and Profile View. If you're familiar with navigation in SwiftUI, you would know that we need to add a .sheet modifier to our entire view and toggle it such that anytime that this toggle has been activated, it will present the profile view. So at the top of the file, I'll create a new variable that has the addState property wrapper. I'll type addState private var show profile view of type bool is equal to false. And then going back over into the .onAppear, I'll check over here if user is not equal to nil, meaning that if a user exists, then I'll toggle the show profile view variable. Finally, at the bottom of the file, I'll make sure to add a full screen cover view modifier. So underneath the second to last curly braces, I'll type full screen cover. For is presented, I'll use $ show profile view, and then for content, I'll make sure that I set it to profile view. And this can be done simply by removing the curly braces and then adding a curly braces at the end of the parentheses and setting this to profile view. I'll add a set of parentheses and then I'll click resume. And it might take some time for the preview to build, but as soon as we start running it, because we have already signed in a user account has been saved, so the profile view pops up immediately. Let me try that one more time. So we have our sign up view here, and because earlier we created an account with our email, we have a user saved onto here. So when I start running the app, the .onAppear method will execute, and because the current user is not equal to nil, meaning that there is a signed up user, the show profile view will be toggled, and when that is set to true, the full screen cover will be activated and profile view will appear in full screen, as shown over here. However, for right now, I'll just comment out the full screen cover view modifier, and this is because we're still not done with our content view.swift file, which I actually should rename to signup view, so I'll go ahead and do that right now. And while I'm doing that, I'll explain why I commented this out. The reason why I commented out the full screen cover view modifier is because we still need to add the sign in card view, and we also need to add in the sign in with Apple button. So we'll get to those real soon, but there's still quite a bit of work left to be done on this screen. So I'll see you all in the next section. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon. Goodbye. Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll get started with building the sign in portion of our sign up screen. So when a user clicks on the sign in button, we'd like the card to turn around and display all the sign-in information. If we take a look at the Figma design file, we can see that our sign in screen looks a lot like the sign up screen. So when the user clicks on the sign in button, we'd likely want a Boolean value to serve as a toggle that determines whether or not we display the sign up card or the sign in card. So after show profile view inside of signupView.swift, I'll type @state private var sign up toggle of type Boolean is currently equal to true, because we are displaying the sign-up card initially. So when we click on the sign in button, we'd like to change the sign-up toggle to false. So I'll click on resume, and then I'll scroll down to where we have the sign in button. And this should be right over here, where we have the current action being a print message being printed to the console. I'll remove this, and instead I'll just say sign-up toggle.toggle. And now, if I run the application, anytime I click on this button over here, the sign up toggle, even though we can't see it, is being selected. So now we can get started on changing the UI based on the toggle. The first thing we'll start with is the background. So if sign up toggle is true, which I determine with a question mark, we'll show background 3. Otherwise, which I determine with a colon, we'll show background 1. Alright. And now if I click in sign in, we can see that the background changes. Cool! This kind of syntax is known as a ternary operator, where it takes in 3 parameters. And you'll see this being used a lot inside declarative syntax programming languages like SwiftUI. Next I'll change the text. So if we have sign up toggle enabled, we'll have the title say sign up. Otherwise, we'll have it say sign in. And we'll do the same for the button down below. So instead of the gradient button having a title of create account, as we have declared over here, instead we'll have it say what our design says, which is sign in. So I'll type that over here, where now gradient button, the button title is going to be create account if it's for signing up, or it's going to say sign in if it's for signing in. Now what you'll notice is that we still have this disclaimer text at the bottom. However, if we take a look at our design, we don't have this disclaimer text or the rectangle underneath. So what we can do is simply omit this if signup toggle is false. So I'll say if signup toggle, meaning if signup toggle is true, then I'll select the text and the rectangle views, and then I'll press the curly braces, and that will wrap it in curly braces. So now if I click on the sign in button, we should see both of those views disappear. I'll also need to change the accessory button we have at the bottom. So I'll add sign up toggle, add a question mark, and instead of already have an account, have the string say don't have an account. And instead of having the gradient text button say sign in, we'll have it say sign up. And so I can test it over here. When I click on sign in, we can see that the screen goes over to the sign in card. However, it's very sudden. So to fix this, what I can do is go back to where we call the sign up toggle, and then what I'll do is wrap it in a with animation. So with an animation of .ease in out, and with a duration of 0.7, I'll make sure that this toggle gets selected. Alright, and now when I click sign in, we can see that we have this smooth transition from the sign up card to the sign in card. But don't worry, we'll make this a little more interactive with 3D animations. Before that, however, we still need to add the reset password button. So I'll do that right away. If I scroll over here, we can see that inside of our vertical stack, we only have one button. However, we can do more and add another button. So underneath this, I'll say if, and I'll add an exclamation mark, sign up toggle is false. What I'll need to do is add another button. And the reason why I only add the button if sign up toggle is false is because this button is the forget password button. And we don't have that button over here. Hence, this button should only show when our sign up toggle is set to false and we're only showing the sign in page. Inside of this if statement, I'll add the button view, with the action and the label. For now, the action is just going to say send reset password email. And at a later time, we'll see how we can send the password reset email. As for the label, what we'll do is we'll create a horizontal stack with a spacing of 4 points. And inside of this horizontal stack, I'll add the text, which is simply going to say forgot password with a question mark. And inside of this text view, we'll set the font to be .footnote, and we'll set the foreground color to be a white color with an opacity of 0.7. And now underneath this text view, what I'll do is I'll add our gradient text view that we created earlier. And this gradient text view is going to have a text that says reset password. And the font is going to be .footnote .bold. And so now we can't see any changes over here because we're in the sign up page. But when I click on the sign in page, we can see that we have the forget password option given to us over here. Now the next thing I want to do is make sure that this transition from sign up to sign in is a little more smoother. And I'll do this by rotating the card, much like how the widget rotates inside of iOS 14. If you press and hold on a widget, and when you select on Edit Widget, the card rotates, and we'll try to achieve this effect inside of our application. Before I do that though, I'll select all my code, and then I'll press Ctrl-I, and this reformats the code so that everything is indented properly. With that started, I can get started on creating the rotation angle effect. Achieving this effect is actually a lot simpler than one might think it takes, especially in SwiftUI. Because we'll be rotating this card, you would be right in guessing that the only state variable we need to change is the angle of this card, and specifically the angle alongside the y-axis. At the top of the file, I'll type @state private var rotation angle is equal to 0.0. And then I'll need to make sure that I increase this rotation angle by 180 degrees when the sign in button is selected. So I'll scroll on down to where we have that button selected. And that's over here. So inside of this with animation function, what I'll do is increase the rotation angle by 180 degrees. So I'll say self.rotation angle plus or equal to 180 degrees. Then I'll need to call on the rotation angle view modifier. I can do this by scrolling on down and right before the .background view modifier we have over here, typing .rotation, and we'll be using the rotation 3D effect. We'll set the angle parameter. So we'll call angle, use the property degrees, and then we'll set the parameter degrees to self.rotation angle. So when we increase our rotation angle by 180 degrees, then the rotation 3D effect will also start turning this entire view alongside this particular axis by the current value of rotation angle. So the axis we have currently set it to is alongside the y-axis, which is exactly what we need. Now I'll click resume, and you can see that something is not quite right. When I click on sign in, we can see we do get that turning effect. However, alongside our card, we also get the turning effect for the text as well. If I click sign up again, we can see that it changes back to normal. Now to make sure that we properly get the effect we desire, what we need to do is copy this rotation 3D effect and paste it again after the horizontal padding. So one 3D effect will be used for just the text to rotate it by 180 degrees, and then after the background, the second rotation 3D effect will turn the background card as well. However, in doing so, it will once again rotate all of the content, giving it a full 360 degree turn. And now, if I click on sign in, we can see that we get the effect we wanted, where we get the card turning, and we also get the text spinning as well, giving a very nice look as a card flipping animation. And we can play with this all day long. I highly encourage you to see what happens if we change some of the other values, but it's always fun to play with rotation 3D effects to see what kind of effects you can produce, and this is something that SwiftUI makes very simple compared to using a framework like UIKit. Lastly, if I click on Sign In, and we're currently in the Sign In page, if I click on the Sign In button, what happens is that it executes all the code inside of the Sign Up function, which is just creating a user. Instead of creating a user when we're inside of the Sign In page, what we'd like to do is make sure that a user is actually signed up. So what I'll do is select all of this authentication code, wrap it inside our curly braces, and then right before the curly braces, I'll say if sign up toggle, meaning if sign up toggle is true, then execute this code. However, if sign up toggle is not true, meaning we're in the sign in page, what we'd like to do is actually sign in the user. So I'll type auth.auth.signin, and we'll have the email and password given to us here. So I'll say email and then password, and for completion, I'll make sure to pass two variables, result and error. And right now, I'll say guard error is equal to nil, else, and inside of curly braces, for now, I'll just print error.localizeDescription and return. Otherwise, I'll just print that the user is signed in. Now in the next section of the course, we'll finish the rest of this sign-in page by adding our Sign In with Apple button. And this is going to be your first look at how to use Sign In with Apple with SwiftUI. So I'll see you all there. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon. Goodbye. Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to Advanced Development in SwiftUI. In this section of the course, we'll take a look at how to use Sign In with Apple with SwiftUI. Sign In with Apple is an amazing sign-in provider that's offered by Apple themselves, and it's a very secure option to let users create and register accounts for your application. Users will have full control over the data they wish to share with you, and so it's always a great look for your app when you are offering multiple sign-in providers that value privacy like Apple. So to start off, we'll build the Sign In with Apple button inside of the Sign In card. So if I click on the Sign In button, right now we just have the Sign Up and Reset Password buttons. Underneath, let's add some space for the Sign Up with Apple button. So I'll scroll on down over to the vertical stack we have over here, and inside of the Sign Up toggle, I have only one button right now. Inside of this if condition, I'll need to first add a rectangle view. This rectangle view is going to serve as a divider. I'll set the frame so that the height is equal to 1 point, and then I'll set the foreground color. The foreground color is going to be a white color with an opacity of 10% or 0.1. Underneath this divider, I'll create the button. So I'll type the button view, and then I'll add the action and label parameters. For the action, I'll just let it say print Sign In with Apple. And then for the label, it'll currently say button, but we'll make sure that we set the frame, giving it a height of 50 points, and making sure that the corner radius is 16 points. And then if I go to the Sign In card, we can see that we just have a simple button where the height of 50 points is given. Of course, the Sign In with Apple button has to actually look like the button that's given over here, as this is industry standard and must be in compliance with Apple's API documentation. So we'll see how we can add this button since SwiftUI doesn't offer a native SwiftUI view. Hence, we'll be using the UI view representable. I'll open the Views folder in the Navigator toolbar, and then I'll select Control and select any file, and select New File from the pop-up menu that shows up. Inside of this file, I'll select Swift file, and I'll name this file Sign In with Apple button. And so we'll have a Sign In with Apple button.swift file created for us. At the top of this file, I'll import SwiftUI. Then I'll import authentication services. Then I'll create the struct, which will be called Sign In with Apple button, and it's going to conform to the UI view representable protocol. And the UI view representable is used whenever we want to merge UIKit with SwiftUI. So we get an error saying that it currently doesn't conform to the protocol. So I'll click this error and add the protocol stubs. First, what is created is a type alias of UI view type, and we'll set this to AS authorization Apple ID button. This basically lets SwiftUI know that sign in with Apple is of the UI view type AS authorization Apple ID button. Next, we need to add the make UI view method as well as the update UI view method. The update UI view method is going to remain empty because there really won't be any updates happening to this particular view. However, for the make UI view, we'll need to return a view that conforms to the AS authorization Apple ID button UI button. So what I'll do is make sure to return AS authorization Apple ID button. I'll add an open set of parentheses, and then I'll make sure to import the type and the style. This gives us the customization properties for this particular sign in with Apple button. We can see that we have a button that says sign in with Apple. So I'll say dot, and I'll make sure to choose the sign in type, and then the style is just going to be .black. And now if I go back over to the sign up view, I can remove the text button we had over here and replace it with just sign in with Apple button. I'll add a set of parentheses, and then I'll resume the preview. And once the preview builds, SwiftUI will read the struct inside the sign in with Apple button and generate the SwiftUI view, such that when we click on sign in, we can see that the sign in with Apple button has been created for us. And now when we select on it, the sign in with Apple message will be printed to the console if we were running it on a simulator. However, what we'd like to do now is make sure that we're actually communicating with Firebase authentication and making sure that users are presented with the sign in with Apple action sheet. So to get started, I'll go over to the SwiftUI Advanced Project view, and inside the Signing and Capabilities tab, I'll select New Capability. And then I'll scroll down, and we can see that we can enable the Sign in with Apple capability. I'll close this project, and next what I need to do is create an NSObject class that is able to communicate with Apple servers and run the code needed to securely log in a user with Apple. So I'll open the helpers folder, and then I'll control and click on any of the files, and then click on new file. I'll select Swift file, and I'll just call this sign in with Apple object. And at the top, I'll need to import several frameworks. The first framework is going to be authentication services. The next framework is going to be CryptoKit, which is a way to get cryptographic functions that is very important for securely communicating user data. And finally, I'll have to import Firebase authentication. Next, I'll create a class, and I'll call it sign in with Apple object, and I'll make sure that it conforms to the NSObject type. Inside of this class, I'll first create a function, and it's through this function that we will allow our users to sign in with Apple. So, as you might expect, the name of this function will be sign in with Apple. I'll add an empty set of parentheses and some curly braces in between. First, I'll have to create a sign in with Apple request. So I'll say let request equal to AS authorization Apple ID provider, add an empty set of parentheses, and then .create request. Next, I'll need to add some of the scopes, which is another fancy way of saying what we are requesting. So I'll type request.requested scopes is equal to, and this will be an array of all the scopes and information we need. We're just going to need the email and the full name of the user. Next, I'll need to generate a nonce. A nonce is a random string that is normally generated when you want to make sure that any data you get from Apple servers is the data that you requested. I'll say let nonce is equal to random nonce string, and we haven't created this function yet. Furthermore, what we'd like to do is make sure we save this nonce so any function inside of our object can access this. So I'll say private var current nonce is of type empty string, and then after the nonce declaration, I'll make sure to set current nonce is equal to nonce, and then I'll set request.nonce is equal to current nonce. Now let's add the random nonce string function. And if I go over to the Firebase documentation, we can see that we already have a function that is given to us from Apple through Firebase. So all I need to do is simply copy this function and then paste it right below. I'll select all my code and press Ctrl A to format my code. And now that we have the random nonce string function generated for us, my request is complete. So after we set request.nonce, I'll create the authorization controller, which is simply going to be the pop-up that shows up asking a user whether or not they want to sign in with Apple. So I'll say let authorization controller equal to AS authorization controller. I'll add an open set of parentheses and make sure that the authorization request is simply the request that we just created. I'll make sure that authorization controller.delegate is set to self, and authorization controller can now perform the requests, which I call using the perform requests method. Now we get an error saying that we can't assign the value of sign in with Apple object to type AS authorization controller delegate, and this is because we haven't let our class sign in with Apple object conform to this delegate. So at the end of the file, I'll type extension sign in with Apple object and make it conform to the AS authorization controller delegate. I'll say func authorization controller, and I'll make sure to add the did complete with authorization method over here. So it's over here that we'll sign in using Firebase Auth, and it's where we'll call the Firebase authentication APIs. Before we do that though, I realized that I forgot something. When we send a nonce over to Apple, we can't just send the random string. If we go over to the Firebase documentation, we're given a function over here that we can use to wrap our nonce in. So I'll select this function, go back over to my code, and then paste it underneath the random nonce string. Then at the top, I'll make sure to set request.nonce to SHA-256 current nonce. And then I'll need to make sure that we handle the logic for what happens when a user has successfully completed authorization. So what I'll do is first check to see if a credential has been passed to us. So if let Apple ID credential equal to authorization dot credential as AS authorization Apple ID credential, then what I'll need to do is first make sure we have the nonce, so guard let nonce equal to current nonce. Else, we'll print an error saying that we have an invalid state where a login callback was received, but no login request was sent. And that makes sense. And that makes sense, because if we receive a response from Apple, but the nonce doesn't match our current nonce, that means that there never was a login request sent. Then I'll click return inside of this guard statement. Now after this guard statement, I'll make sure that we get a token from Apple. Guard let Apple ID token equal to Apple ID credential dot identity token, else I'll print enable fetch identity token, and then I'll return after this guard statement. Lastly, I'll need to make sure that we are able to get the string value of this token. So I'll say guard let ID token string is equal to string where the data comes from the Apple ID token and the encoding is .utf8. Else, what I'll do is I'll print enable to serialize token string from data, and then I'll return the error. Finally, if we get to this point in our code, that means that we have passed all the guard statements. So I can create a new credential that will be used to sign in with Firebase authentication. I'll let credential equal to authprovider.credential, and over here I'll make sure to set the provider ID to apple.com, the ID token to the ID token string, and the raw nonce to simply nonce. And then now I can say auth.auth dot sign in with an auth credential, which is going to be credential, and then we'll have the completion and the result and the error. So I'll create those two variables called result and error, and we'll say guard error is equal to nil, else if the error is not nil, we'll print error.localizeDescription, and then we'll return. I need to mark the class as public, the sign in with Apple function as public, and the authorization controller as public as well. And with that completed, I can close this file. And now I'll scroll all the way up to the top where I'll create a new state property variable. I'll type add state private var, and I'll call it sign in with Apple object, and I'll set it equal to the sign in with Apple object class we just created. And now scrolling back down over to where we have the sign in with Apple button that we created, right over here, inside of this action parameter, all I'll type is sign in with Apple object dot sign in with Apple. And so I encourage you to run the app in a simulator and give it a shot. Make sure that you're signed into your iCloud account before you try this out. So if you click on sign in, and then you click and sign in with Apple, we'll need to sign in with our Apple ID. But this pop-up alone lets us know that sign in with Apple is working properly. And so once we complete the sign in with Apple, it will notify Firebase authentication that a user has signed in, and if we remove this uncommented code out, it will display the profile view. And that's all there is to using sign in with Apple with SwiftUI. As you can see, it was very simple. And with that out of our way, we can continue to build the rest of the app. So I'll see you all in the next section. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye! Hello everyone, my name is Sai from Design Plus Code, and welcome back to my course Advanced Development in SwiftUI. So far, we have built our sign up page and seen how we can use animations in SwiftUI to turn it into a sign in page. Now in this section, we'll finish building the rest of this view, and we won't have to return to this view until we get to core data. All that's left for us to do in this section is just 3 simple tasks. The first is we need to make sure that when we click on the reset password button, an email is sent to us asking us to reset our password. The next is to make sure that anytime we face an error or any success messages, or even with the reset password button, we have a way to display this alert to users. And finally, as you may notice, when we switch from the sign in page to the sign up page, all our animations are very smooth except for the image transition. As you can see, the image changes suddenly and with no animation. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to animate an image in SwiftUI. However, there is a way to emulate this transition, which I would like to show you today. So let's get started. First, we'll be taking a look at how to fix this image transition. It's quite simple. First, what we need is a fade toggle, which is just going to be a Boolean value to control our animation. So at the top, I'll type add state private var fade toggle of type bool is equal to true. Next, I need to attach this fade toggle to some of the view modifiers that we currently have inside of our view. The first is going to be the image view. So underneath edges ignoring safe area, I'll type dot opacity and make sure that if the fade toggle is set to true, I'll make sure that our image view has an opacity of 1.0. Otherwise, it will be 0.0. Next, I need a way to call this toggle. So what I'll do is make sure to scroll on down to where we call the with animation toggle every time we switch from the sign in page to the sign up page. And it's right over here. We can see that we have a with animation method over here that currently toggles the sign up toggle. However, this has a duration of 0.7 seconds, and we'd like ours to be a lot shorter, such that it can change from one image to another image in half the time. Therefore, I'll make sure that right before this with animation method to call another with animation method. And over here, I'm going to make sure that the animation is ease in out with a duration of 0.35. Furthermore, in this first animation, I'll call fade toggle. Next, what I'll do is call dispatch queue.main.async, which is going to execute some asynchronous code. So I'll say async after, and the deadline is going to be .now plus 0.35. And what I'll execute is the same thing again, calling the with animation method with an ease in out animation style and with a duration of 0.35 seconds. And inside of this method, I'll call fade toggle. Now, what my goal is that in the first animation, that is of 0.35 seconds long, I'd like to decrease the opacity of this image all the way down to 0, so that when our image changes from background 3 to background 1, it won't be apparent to the users. And then when we call the self.fadeToggle again after another 0.35 seconds, or as a total at the end of 0.7 seconds, then we'll show the image again, and this time it will present the new image. And this is a quick fix to showing how you can create a transition on an image. So I'll click resume now, and then once our preview has finished loading, we'll click on the sign in button, and you can see that transition of the image. If you focus on the card, as the card rotates, we're getting that effect of the image transitioning from one background to another. Isn't that great? However, I really don't like this white background appearing over here, as it isn't very synchronous with our design language. So what I'll do is add a new view. Specifically, I'll add a color view, such that the background, instead of being white, matches the color that we want. So I'll type color, and the color I'll be using is a secondary background. Furthermore, I'll make sure that it stretches all the way to the edges of the screen by setting edges ignoring safe area to .all, and now I can set the opacity. So if the fade toggle is true, then I'd like to make sure it has an opacity of 0.0. Otherwise, I'll have it set to 1.0. And now when I click on sign in, we can see that we get that transition, and instead of a white background, we're presented with the more purple background that's synchronous with the rest of the design language elements. Next, we'll see how we can send a reset password message to our users. I'll scroll on down to where I have the reset password button, and this should be inside of the if condition that says right over here, the if signup toggle is equal to false. Currently, we're printing a message to the console, but we'll remove that, and instead we'll call the function send password reset email, and I'll add a set of parentheses. Next, we actually need to create this function. So I'll copy the name of this function and scroll on down, and right after the signup function, I'll call func, paste the function name, which is send password reset email, and then I can start calling upon the Firebase authentication APIs to do so. It's quite simple, much like how it was to create a user or sign in. I'll type auth.auth with a set of parentheses, .send password reset, and I'll send it to the email that is stored inside of the email variable, and then for the completion, I'll make sure to define a variable called error, and inside of this, I'll say guard error is equal to nil, else I will print error !localized description and return. Otherwise, I'll print password reset email sent. And that's all. I'll click try again and make sure that the preview builds, and this time we shouldn't face any errors, and I'll enter an email that I signed up with, and then if I go to the sign in page and then select reset password, while we aren't presented with an alert that shows whether or not the reset password has been sent, which we'll deal with in the next task, if you check your email, you should see that you will have received a new mail from Firebase that's asking you to reset your password for this particular project. And just like that, another task has successfully been completed. Lastly, we need to show an alert for every time we face an error or when the reset password has been sent successfully. So what I'll do is create 3 new variables. The first variable is going to be much like how we created a Boolean variable showing whether or not to show the profile view, will be called show alert, and it's going to be show alert view of type Boolean, and it's going to be equal to false. Next, I'll create 2 more variables called alert title and alert message. They are both going to be of type string and currently going to be empty right now. So alert title and then alert message. And both of them are going to be empty strings. Then I'll scroll on down all the way to the bottom of where we have our rotation 3D effect. And underneath this view modifier, I'll type dot alert, and then I'll use the isPresented and the content parameters. The isPresented is going to be $alert $show alert view. And the content, which I'm just going to remove here and simply use implicit completion handler, I'll simply say alert, add a set of parentheses, and then we'll have the title, message, and the dismiss button. The title is going to be a text where the string is of alert title. The message is also going to be a text view, but this time it's going to have a string value of alert message, and the dismiss button is just going to say .cancel, which is going to be a simple cancel button. And now, to show our alert, we just need to set the alert title and alert message, and then toggle the show alert view Boolean variable every time we want to show an alert. So over here, I'll remove the user signed up print statement inside of our sign up function, and instead of printing error.localized description, right before that, I'll say self.alertTitle is equal to uh-oh. And then instead of printing the error.localized description, I'll say self.alertMessage is equal to this localized description. And then finally, I'll say self.show alert toggle, show alert view dot toggle. And then I'll repeat the same process for the next section as well. So I'll remove the print statement, set the error to alert message, set alert title to uh-oh, title is equal to uh-oh, and then after setting each of these variables, I'll simply call show alert view dot toggle. And as for the password reset email, we won't be removing the print statement, and instead we'll make sure to set this to the alert title actually, as this will serve well as an alert title. After this, we'll set the alert message, and the alert message is going to be check your inbox for an email to reset your password. And then I'll call show alert view dot toggle. And then of course I can copy this error alert code and paste it inside of the guard statement. And now to test this out, I can click on resume to resume the preview, and then what I'll try to do is I'll ask for the reset email again. So I can type my email, then I'll go to the sign in page, and then I'll click on reset email, and we should see that we get an alert telling that the reset email has been sent. However, this alert can work for many more possibilities. For example, if I sign in and then put some fake password or a password that I know isn't correct and click on sign in, we'll get an error message saying that the password is invalid or the user does not exist. Or if my user doesn't enter an email and I click on sign in, then it will say the email address is badly formatted. Isn't that great? With just 3 variables, we were able to show a customizable alert that lets the user know exactly what is wrong. This kind of detail is quite easily created in SwiftUI. And that's all for this section. We've successfully wrapped up building the sign up view page. We'll go over to profileview.swift and we'll continue building the rest of this app. So I'll see you all there. Talk to you soon and have a great day. Goodbye.